Welcome back to the Inside Canes Recruiting Podcast. I'm Luke Chaney, joined here today by, of course, Stephen Wagner, and we have a ton of recruiting updates to talk about. Fresh off of Miami's 27-24 win over Notre Dame, where it seemed like a million recruits in attendance. I mean, just one of the most loaded game day visitor weekends that we've seen, since Mario's been here. One of the biggest highlights of this weekend, Anthony Jones making a surprise visit there. Stephen, just the impact of him taking this game day visit to Miami. Just what do you have on that front, and just how meaningful was this for Miami to get him at Hard Rock Stadium for this type of game?
Anthony Jones was hands down the biggest surprise visitor of the weekend. We did not expect him. We were not able to confirm his attendance leading up to the game. So it was a huge surprise whenever we saw him walking through the front door. We kind of got the sense that going into this weekend, there was going to be a chance that there could be a surprise visitor, but we did not expect it to be a whale like Anthony Jones. Now, it was really surprising because Miami was initially left off as top three whenever he committed to Oregon. It was Oregon, Alabama, and Texas A&M that were really up there at the end for him. We kind of felt like Miami had fallen off a little bit after it kind of seemed like they gained a little bit of momentum a little bit earlier in the summer for him, especially coming off of that official visit. But I can tell you that Miami is absolutely still working on this. They're still chipping away, and they are going to find a way to keep themselves in this recruitment. We're going to continue monitoring him. I'm not, overwhelmingly confident that the Hurricanes are going to be able to flip him, but they have pulled off really big in-season shockers before. I mean, some of you remember Hayden Lowe, who ended up being a 5-star edge last year. He was a really, really big surprise whenever Miami successfully flipped him from USC. Then the year before that, Justin Scott, who we assumed Miami's chances were just over with. He ended up flipping from Ohio State. I believe that was in late November of 2023, I want to say. Excuse me. Miami is absolutely going to find a way to stick around for some of these really top talents. And I think that Jones is definitely going to be one of them. Some other top visitors included the 2027 5-stars, Mark Matthews and Zyron Forstall. Both of those guys are going to be big priorities. But in 2026, they were able to get a number of really top local guys, Calvin Russell, James Johnson, Derek Cooper to campus. I'm expecting the Hurricanes to be able to be in the mix for those guys really until signing day. I think that Miami's continuing to kind of make steady progress, just kind of chipping away with Cooper. I like their position for James Johnson. I don't think that there's an imminent flip or an imminent commitment or anything like that coming up, but I do think Miami has positioned itself very well for him, and I expect them to be contenders for the foreseeable future. And then Calvin Russell, publicly, he keeps on saying he's committed to Syracuse. But again, kind of like James Johnson, I think Miami really is right there. I think Miami is a lot closer than he's admitting publicly. I really think Miami's in a pretty decent spot.
And Stephen, you mentioned all those potential flip targets that were in attendance for Miami's game against Notre Dame. And I'm curious, just which of those guys that you talked about you think at this point in time you would say has the greatest chance of flip? No, not necessarily predicting them to flip to Miami, but just who is Miami in the best standing with, you think, at this time?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough question. I do think that Miami is in that thing with Cooper. I think that they're in it with Justice Fitzpatrick too. I think they're in it with Calvin Russell and James Johnson. It's kind of hard to say that I think that, one of these guys, might be closer to becoming a Hurricane than other guys. But I will say that I don't think we'd be talking about him if we didn't feel like Miami had a pretty legitimate chance for them. Derek Cooper, Miami's recruited him harder than anyone for longer. I still believe the Hurricanes are recruiting him harder than anyone. He's committed to Texas, but I think if he doesn't end up at Texas, he's going to end up at Miami. That's just kind of my read on the situation. Justice Fitzpatrick, we reported last month, the gap between Georgia and the rest of the pack is not as wide as some may believe. I do think Miami's definitely in the mix. Them beating Notre Dame definitely helped their standing. I am not sleeping at all on James Johnson. Whenever he initially committed to Georgia, about a week later or so, Miami did have a very legitimate chance to flip him. He ended up ultimately going to Texas, but Miami was absolutely in that mix. And I don't think a lot of people realize just how close he actually was to coming to Miami before he ended up going to the Longhorns. He's going to get back to Austin this fall. He'll be at a Texas game day. I believe it's going to be September 13th or September 20th. I may be wrong on that, so don't take that as a fact. But he is going to be back in Austin. The Longhorns are still doing a good job there. But Miami really is in a pretty decent position. They are going to have a chance with Johnson until the very end. Calvin Russell, I think that him seeing Malachi Toney really ball out the way that he did, he had 6 catches for 80 yards and a touchdown or something like that. I mean, that performance from a true freshman and someone who you're really, really close with. Remember, Toney and Russell are really good and tight friends and do still keep in touch. Russell said that Toney himself isn't really recruiting him, super hard or trying to pull him to Miami or anything like that. But Miami has very successfully used the Toney angle as a way to get their foot in the door, or keep their foot in the door, I should say, with this 5-star prospect. I think that Miami is going to be in this really up until the last couple of weeks with Russell. I don't expect Miami to go anywhere. I don't think that any of those guys are close. I don't think that, Miami is doing exceptionally well with one of those guys in comparison to the rest of the pack. But I do think that Miami will probably be able to get at least 2 of the 4 at some point this fall. I'd be surprised if Miami doesn't successfully flip at least a couple of those guys, just given the Hurricanes' track record over the last 2 years.
Yeah, and these are all 4, high 4-star blue chip recruits. And hey, it's September, which means, in the Mario Cristobal era, this is traditionally we're entering flip season right now. So make sure to keep an eye out for that. And then just moving on to the class of 2027, because yes, it's over a year away, but Miami had some very impressive visitors in attendance for that Miami game in that class. First and foremost, with Mark Matthews, number 2 overall player in the country out of STA, fantastic offensive tackle who we all expect Miami to really place a priority on in that 27 recruiting cycle. Zyron Forstall out of the New Orleans area, top edge in the class, or number 3 overall player, I should add. Miami's doing a good job there. It's still very early, but he likes what Jason Taylor's telling him. He has a good connection there. And then I want to ask you about this player in particular, Stephen, Nick Laneir, who you did place an RPM prediction for, local receiver out of Northwestern. Just what's your vibe there? And I guess what led you to place that prediction for Laneir to Miami?
Yeah, from what I've heard, it does sound like Miami is in a really, really good position. I believe the Hurricanes are getting close. It would not stun me if he's Miami's next member of their 2027 recruiting class. We're watching him incredibly closely. Obviously, that would be a whale commitment. Been one of the top guys that Miami's been pursuing in 27 for quite a while now. He really emerged as, just a straight up stud last year during his high school sophomore season. So far, through the first couple of games of this season, his junior season, he's absolutely looked the part. We saw him at camps this summer. He really impressed us. He just starred on the 7-on-7 circuit. We're continuing to monitor him extremely closely, but that would be a really, really big splash commitment for Miami if the Hurricanes are able to get him, which right now I would be really stunned if he is not a Hurricane at some point this fall. And then another guy that I kind of want to shift toward while we're on the subject of RPMs that I entered a pick for is 2028 edge Meshi Dobson from Plantation. He's a 3-star top 300 player in 2028. I believe there's an excellent chance that he becomes Miami's first commit of the 2028 cycle. The Hurricanes are in excellent position for him. I do believe that he's probably going to be a Cane sooner rather than later. Had some people confirm to me that Miami really is in a tremendous position there. I'm very confident about the work that Miami has put in there. And it sounded to me like for both of these guys, the Notre Dame visit just kind of helped Miami climb even higher for them. They kind of skyrocket. They were already pretty high on Miami, and the Hurricanes just skyrocketed even more after that visit. I think that both are probably going to be Hurricanes at some point this fall.
Yeah, and with Dobson, I had the chance to watch him last night as Plantation took on West Broward, and he's only 28 as a sophomore, so a little bit raw in some regards. But I mean, you just see his frame. I mean, 6'3", 235. He's built incredibly well, and he just has so much more room to fill out from a physical and developmental perspective. So, an exciting recruit to follow for sure. And I'm curious, Stephen, with Laneir, just what should Hurricanes fans know about the type of receiver that he is? Just as far as from what you've seen from him in games and camps, what type of player is Miami potentially getting if he does end up committing to the Hurricanes?
He is a really shifty, versatile, and hyper athletic pass catcher who plays a lot bigger than his size. He's only about 6 feet tall or so, but he can play inside or out. He has the speed to burn you on the perimeter, but he's also shifty enough and smart enough they can kind of manipulate you a little bit in the slot. He really is a coach's dream, just because I think there are so many possibilities for what you can do with him. How much bigger he's actually going to get? Is he going to be 6'1", 6'2", 6'3"? I personally have no clue. I think he'll grow a little bit more, but he's never going to be one of these really huge, physically dominant receivers. But he is so damn good at manipulating zone defenses, at understanding the techniques that cornerbacks are playing and understanding how to use that against them. His ability to keep DBs on their heels until the last possible second, I mean, is second to none. I've been watching him for the last 2 years. I think there's a very legitimate argument that he might be the best receiver in all of South Florida as a high school junior. I felt like he really burst onto the scene last year. I mean, I'll straight up say it. Last year, whenever I watched Miami Northwestern and Laneir was a junior and Russell was a senior, there were moments where I just felt that Laneir was a straight up better receiver than Russell. I mean, he was owning his target share on the perimeter, even with a five-star prospect like Russell playing right next to him, demands a ton of attention from defenses. There have been so many moments where I've watched this kid and I'm like, man, at the high school level, this kid's straight up unguardable. Like I said, we watched him over the summer. We saw him on the camp circuit. His ability to make, these Superman acrobatic catches, I mean, it's just absolutely off the charts. His awareness of where he is on the field, I mean, really is second to none. It's kind of one of these things that you really can't teach either. He just constantly is aware of how to contort his body, how to stay in bounds, how much space he has, the distance between him and defenders, even whenever he can't actually see the defender, understanding where the sideline is, understanding where the hash marks are, understanding what his target points are. I really don't know what else you can say about this kid. I think he'll have a legitimate argument to be the best receiver in America in 2027. Right now, he's listed as a top 20 overall prospect by Rivals, number 19 overall recruit, number 3 receiver. Looking at the guys ahead of him, I really do think that there's a legit chance that he could be the number 1 wideout in America. I've seen enough of him to know that I want to buy so much freaking stock in this kid. I think Miami fans should too. People have kind of asked me, how does he compare to someone like Calvin Russell? And I feel like with a kid like Laneir, his floor is going to be much, much higher. I don't know if his ceiling will be the same as someone like Calvin Russell, who just kind of has these freak athletic measurables that, NFL scouts really look for and really will help him, potentially have the opportunity to be a first-round draft pick. But Laneir is going to have a much, much higher floor. I think he'll be ready to contribute much earlier. He is the kind of prospect that I do think can absolutely come in and earn his share of targets as a true freshman. Will he start? I think that would totally depend on who's ahead of him on the depth chart, but he absolutely is going to contribute as a true freshman no matter where he goes.
Yeah, and we saw last week, Miami has no issues playing true freshmen early. I mean, obviously, Malachi Tony broke out in the way that he did, but even Josh Moore, another true freshman, played a lot in that game against Notre Dame. So early playing time is definitely an option here if Laneir ends up a Hurricane. Now, before I ask you rather about some less than optimistic 2027 Hurricanes recruiting news, I mentioned him earlier. Mark Matthews was there for that Miami Notre Dame game, as well as top 25 linebacker Caden Henderson, a very, very elite player in his own regard, or in his own respect, rather. Just what were the vibes that you got from Matthews and from Henderson after that Miami game? Just what did they think of the game?
So I think that it's more likely than not that Mark Matthews will ultimately stay in state. Now, he has been pretty clear. He wants his recruitment to be national. He wants to make sure that he takes visits to schools like Oregon and Tennessee and Alabama, and all of these top programs in other states that are doing really good jobs for him, and programs that he feels like are going to be championship contenders. But I think at the end of the day, Miami, Florida, and Florida State are going to be the three schools that I personally believe. This is me editorializing. This is me kind of just throwing my own opinion, my own prediction out there, not what he himself is saying. But I think it's going to come down to one of those three schools. Florida State is doing really, really well for him right now. FSU beating Alabama, I think, was absolutely huge for him because it shows that Mike Norvell and the relationship that he's built and the effort that he's put in with Matthews, not only does he have that, but he can now also look on the field and he can see that Florida State is winning. Florida State isn't the same 2-10 dumpster fire that they were a year ago. But on the same, by the same token, he's got a lot to like about Miami, and he admitted that he's got a lot to like about Miami. He loved the way Miami's offensive line looked against Notre Dame, and a Notre Dame team that he knows was in the national championship last year. So he's now seeing Miami beat high-quality opponents too. The Hurricanes have sunk a ton of effort into maintaining relationships at St. Thomas. Some of you guys might remember, I think this was the 2024 class. Miami ended up signing 4 kids from St. Thomas. And honestly, I think in 2027, there's a very realistic chance that Miami could sign 4 more kids from St. Thomas. And Matthews would obviously be the highest ranked, and he'd kind of be the crown jewel of that class. But I think the Hurricanes are definitely going to be in a good position there. Now, I think that we've got a ways before we say, hey, this is actually a battle between, such and such programs, or, Miami is the front runner, or, this is specifically where Miami sits. I think we've got a while before we get to that point. But I do think that by the time we get to the spring, we're going to be talking a lot about Miami from Mark Matthews.
Got it, man. And then lastly, I want to say this for the end because I didn't want to bring bad vibes to the show. In the beginning. But it does appear with 2027 top 15 cornerback Ken Dobson, who we expect to reclassify to that 26 class. Been hearing a lot of buzz about UNC, University of North Carolina, of course. Just what's the latest on that front, and where do you think things will stand with Miami when it's all said and done?
Yeah, from what I've heard, this thing is pretty close to a done deal. I do believe that this thing is probably happening sooner than later. I do expect him to go ahead and complete that flip and go ahead and become a Tar Heel. But I am not entering a pick in favor of North Carolina to flip him because I think there's a very legitimate chance that he could end up flipping back to Miami later in the fall. He's always loved Miami. He's been really high on the Hurricanes for a really long time. But, I think some of us can kind of, read between the lines in regard to, kind of what's going on with North Carolina. Tar Heels have really been making a pretty strong push for about the last month or so. But I was told right now the ball is in Miami's court. I think we'll kind of see how Miami ends up choosing to respond. But I do think that it's most likely that he is going to go ahead. He'll make the flip to North Carolina. But like I said, I think there's a really, really good chance that he could end up back in Miami later this fall.
Yeah, and just if listen, if he ends up, as Steven said, committing to North Carolina, still a lot of time left in this whole recruiting process, right? I mean, guys like Malachi Tony, he committed to Miami, decommitted, then ended up a Hurricane. Armando Blunt committed to Miami early in the fall, decommitted in the fall, then committed to Florida State, decommitted, and of course he ended up a Hurricane. So these things are always fluid, they're always changing, and you never know in recruiting. It's a wild ball game. Anyways, thank you all for stopping by today for another Inside Hurricanes recruiting podcast. You can head to the website, canesport.com, for more recruiting news, updates, and of course, your team news and updates. And if there's anything that we missed on today's show, you can ask us in the Recruiting Storm Center message board, and you can test drive that for only $1. So make sure to do that if you're not subscribed already. On behalf of Stephen Wagner, I'm Luke Chaney, and thank you all for stopping by today.